This is the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast, helping filmmakers who share a Christian worldview stay in touch, informed, and inspired. Quiet on set. Rolling. Today's host is Matt Chastain.
With the original play, it was a musical. And so we just used, a lot of popular Christian songs, even some, All I Want for Christmas Is You is in there somewhere. And, that would cost a lot more to get all those song rights than making the movie.
Yeah, welcome to another exciting episode of the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast. My name is Matt, and I'm really excited today to have my new friend James Tew on. James, I've not gotten a chance to see this movie, but I saw the trailer, and the trailer really makes me excited to have you on. James is the executive producer of a movie called Carol. Thanks for coming on the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast.
I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and share a little bit.
Yeah, let's tell folks who you are. So James is an award-winning journalist. He's a public relations professional for more than 30 years. He followed God's leading into film with the blessing and support of his wife, Shannon. And lesson number one, future filmmakers of the world, if you don't have your wife's blessing and support, you may want to work on that first before you follow your calling. So that was a smart man, I can tell already. So your feature film, Carol, it began as a church Christmas play, and it was designed to deliver the gospel message through an original story that kind of follows the framework of A Christmas Carol. And so through these God-ordained connections, the project went on an 11-year journey to become a really wonderful Christian feature-length Christmas musical that you released in 2024. So the first thing that kind of jumps out at me on this bio is the patience of Job and the wandering of Moses for 40 years in the desert of this 11-year journey you went on. I think as filmmakers, a lot of times we get this feeling that, hey, I just wrote a first draft, God told me to do it, therefore it's ordained, and we should be in production of this thing by next Tuesday, maybe next month at the latest. So you were a patient enough man to realize that that's not exactly the journey that we are all led to.
Well, there were definitely times it felt like the wandering of Moses, particularly, I think, in the financing end of it.
Amen.
But, there were a lot of things. The original play was written for a bunch of high school students to perform. 3 of those high school students were my sons. And so we were putting kids through college and had some other things kind of going on. Originally, when the play was written, we didn't even have a feature film in mind. It was just, the church did an annual Christmas play. This was a way to do an original story, but still familiar story, one people could have some connection to, that had a gospel message in it. And what happened was people afterwards said, "Oh, this is really great. You should make a movie out of it." And my initial reaction was kind of, well, yeah, right. That's a nice thing to say. I don't know about that. But as it turned out, the newspaper chain I was working for at the time had written an article about George Johnson, who's a Christian film director based in this area. And so I sent the script. I sent a link to the YouTube video of the play performance to George, and just said, "Hey, we did this. A couple people thought it might make a good movie. What do you think?" Fully expecting to either get no response or maybe a nice email saying, "Thank you for your submission. It's not appropriate at this time." To my shock, George emailed me back, and in later conversations, he said he's not even entirely sure why. In the sense of he usually doesn't respond to those kind of emails, but he emailed me back and said, yeah, it would make a good movie. There were 2 obstacles, and those were kind of what we worked at once we got the kids through college over the next 11 years. One was financing.
And that's always the big one.
It is. And then the other one was that with the original play, it was a musical. And so we just used, a lot of popular Christian songs, even some, All I Want for, and, that would cost a lot more to get all those song rights than making the movie. So the 11 years between play and movie were, one, getting the financing put together, and then number 2, getting original music to replace the songs because we wanted it to stay a musical. It's a lot of fun that way.
Yeah, if you think making a film is hard, try getting original score or original songs written to it. That sounds like a whole extra layer of complexity.
It, well, honestly, that was very much a God thing. I had never written music before. My musical background was being forced through 2 years of piano lessons by my mother and playing trumpet through high school. So I'd done a lot of writing, but never written a song. But as we started to go back and look through the script and look through the songs, honestly, God started putting songs on my heart.
Wow.
I started writing down lyrics. In the meantime, I'd had a job change and we had moved to a new community. And the worship pastor at the church we were attending in the new community had a background in songwriting. He had traveled with a Christian band. And so I wrote some of these lyrics and sent them to him. And he said, yeah, these are actually pretty good lyrics. Kind of, same reaction like getting the response from George. I was a little surprised. So then I sat down with him and he did some chorus writing. I sat down on a keyboard with my 2 years of piano and kind of plunked some things out. And we put together original songs. Now those songs were refined quite a bit between what we did and what wound up in the final film. But that was the beginning of it.
Going back to George Johnson for a second, I don't know George. We're Facebook friends. As you know, once you get into this community, you end up becoming Facebook friends with a lot of folks. One thing I noticed, well, first of all, I think we need to have him on this podcast. I have not talked to George. I don't think that Jeff and Jacqueline have, but that's going to be my next target is talking to George. One thing I noticed about him, because, you said you just kind of reached out to him cold. George is one of those guys who somehow stays very busy. He's always got a project going just from being Facebook friends with him. And they all look like pretty substantial sized projects. So I think, like you said, it was a God thing and kind of lucky to get somebody of his caliber on board.
Yeah, I would say blessed. I mean, like you said, very much a God thing besides the fact that he's done like 6 feature films, George also has done a number of music videos. So he had a background that lent itself very well to doing a musical. And it was a project that appealed to him, I think, for that reason that he kind of brought both those elements to it. And, George had a lot of great connections that, Carol is a low budget Christmas musical. There's even a line that Robert Amaya ad-libs in there that kind of pokes fun at that. It doesn't look as low budget as it is. George just had connections to pull together an incredible cast. And we had James Burgess as our cinematographer who just did beautiful work. We had Teddy Halloran, who had worked on The Chosen. We pulled together a team that really overachieved by far for the budget we had. And that was a huge blessing.
I think that's obvious when you look at the trailer alone. Hopefully we'll link the trailer and all your socials in the show notes here. But if you look at the trailer, you can tell right off, any of us can who are even remotely involved in filmmaking, you can tell how well it's shot real quickly. And it's shot beautifully. It is not shot like a low budget film. I know you said that, but any executive producer on a podcast circuit would say the same thing. But I'm telling you, as an objective third party, it looks fair. It's beautiful, beautifully shot.
Yes.
So, and that's so important these days.
Yeah, and that's even one thing George said afterward. It was just how beautiful the movie turned out. Just some of the cinematography. There's one scene that's in Christmas Past where it's a town Christmas dance, and we shot it here in Angola, Indiana, where I live. It's called Selman Timber Frame. It's a timber frame pavilion. We shot it at night with these Christmas lights, and just the camera, kind of pans across and everything. And there's even like a drone shot above looking on the dancers and the lights and everything. It is just beautiful. And, kind of has this kind of melancholy song that kind of goes with it. Solomon, who's the main character, played by Aaron Fullen, is singing about wishing that he could go back to this point of time where he first met his wife and he could stay at this time forever before he messes his life up later on. And so it really comes together so beautifully.
Yeah, I would agree. In our next episode, because we're going to do two, I want to kind of get nerdy and really, really dive in deep about the elements of your production, because I think that's all filmmakers want to talk deep into production and kind of hear how it went. But for now, I want to kind of go back and talk about the origination of the story, where it came from. I mean, you're the executive producer, but did you write the original play as well?
Yes. Yeah. So I like to say that Carol started with A Charlie Brown Christmas. And
Cool.
The reason that is because the church we were attending in Kendallville, Indiana, it's about 40 minutes from where we are now. Like I said, they did an annual Christmas play. The youth performed it. We had a very talented youth group. A lot of them were involved in theater. And they had done A Charlie Brown Christmas, and we got a really good community reaction to it. Lots of people showed up because they know that story. And the director at our church was kind of lamenting that there's not a lot of familiar Christmas stories, things that people watch every year on TV, that you have that strong gospel element. I mean, obviously we have the Christmas story, but, most people get into Santa and Frosty and, Charlie Brown Christmas,
Yeah.
which you've got Linus presenting that. And so, it was kind of turning that in my head, and I'd written some skits and things, and I was like, well, what could we do that kind of has that familiar framework, something people will know a little bit about going in, but, have a strong gospel message to it. And so that was kind of where Carol began. It's, Carol is obviously shortening Christmas Carol. And I wanted it to be more original than, you do Scrooge Gets Saved or something like that. That just seems way too cliche. So we set it in the modern day. We set it in a small town in Indiana, which is, where the church was and where the movie takes place. And, we have this modern day character, this kind of modern day Scrooge who still goes through that framework, the Christmas past, Christmas present, Christmas future. But again, then there's a gospel message to it. It's not just, hey, get your Christmas spirit and all is right with the world. And when we then made the move from play to movie, George even felt it still had too much of the original Christmas Carol in it. So we even made more changes to kind of make Carol its own story, even though we still stick with that framework.
Yeah, that's got to be always difficult. How do you, because I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to, like you said, provide a framework for story that's familiar enough to pull people in while still remaining original in that execution. And that's got to be I wouldn't call that the creative problem. That's the creative opportunity, the challenge that leads to more creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun to go through to do that. And just Solomon in particular, who's the main character, lived rent free in my head for, a dozen years between writing the original play and then as we changed him a bit. Because in the original play, he was still more, he was still rich. He was still kind of a Scrooge type. In the movie, he's not rich. He's, probably lower middle class. He's younger than he was in the play. He's more of a slacker, but he's still somebody whose choices have damaged those around him. And that's kind of what we learn. Is how that's happened. And Solomon even comes to realize the damage that his choices have done over the course of the movie.
Yeah, and he may share the name, but I don't think his character is much like King Solomon either, right?
No. So Solomon Lynch is his name, and the name came about because in the original play, one of the songs we did was "You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch," but we changed it to Mr. Lynch to rhyme with that. So that the name stuck, but that was the original for that. And then I wanted, it's kind of paralleling Ebenezer Scrooge. Ebenezer is a biblical name, and then Scrooge was the last name. So we did Solomon Lynch instead.
I think it's smart, though, to take that different approach to Scrooge, because it's not just rich old geezers who have this problem of actually connecting with the gospel. It's all of us.
Yeah. And I mean, the commonality to both versions of Solomon is that they are both very self-centered, which again is a problem we all have. I mean, you see Solomon on the screen and you see what I'm like sometimes when I'm at my worst. That's the core conflict that stayed in the movie and that works real well, is that Solomon's got to realize that there's more to him more than what he cares about. At the beginning of the movie, he flops on his couch and, exclaims, "It's good to be the king," as he's sitting in this messy living room. And it's, the whole course of the movie is him learning about, again, the damage that attitude has done to him, to those around him, even on a wider scale.
Okay, well, enough about you. Let's talk about me. Speaking of self-centered, I'm kidding. No, it's all about dying to self, and I think that's a great biblical message that sometimes doesn't shine through when we talk about the Christmas stories, as that's a great part of the gospel to blend into that. I want to go back to financing for a second, because that's everybody's problem. A lot of us think that we're going to write the next great Christian film, and there's these people out there who just can't wait to give you $7 million to make your masterpiece. But that's not how the world works. And so you've noticed that, and you've lived through that. So how were you able to finance it?
So ours, from what I've talked with other producers, was a fairly unique journey in that. So what happened was, as we were working, my wife and I both had 401ks. And, once we got the kids out of college, we kind of noticed that those 401ks had kind of grown to about the level of what George had mentioned to me earlier would be the rough budget for a film. And I went with a group of guys from my church. There's a thing the denomination does called man camp, and everybody, a bunch of men get together at a camp and we eat lots of bacon and zip line and things like that. And one of the speakers who was at the man camp that year, his point was, are you saving all this money? Are you going to retire and just retire from Jesus? Are you going to, vacation and whatever? Or are you going to use what you have to further God's work? So I got back from man camp and I talked to my wife, Shannon, and I said, I'm kind of wondering if, God wants us to use our 401ks to fund this film. And her response was, "Yeah, sure. I've been thinking that all along. Where have you been?" So,
that's a wonderful woman right there. Wow.
Yeah. So, you talk about the wife supporting, she's, a few steps ahead of me at some of these times. So we worked with a company that actually helps you roll 401ks over into starting up a small business without having to incur tax penalties. Because obviously when you take 401k money out, the government has regulations on that. And so what we did was, our film company is owned by an S Corp, and we rolled our 401ks over to buy shares in the S Corp. So we are now the shareholders of this company that made the film. There have been, it's challenging kind of on the back end now, because it makes it more challenging to put more money in if we want to. So we've kind of learned to, get creative with some different expenses and like that. But yeah, it worked. We were able to get the amount, pretty much about the exact amount we needed to get the film made is what we were able to put together.
Yeah, that's an unbelievable leap of faith right there, to self-fund your movie. I will say that it, obviously the upside of that is that now you don't have investors breathing down your neck about, what's next? What are you doing? Are you selling the movie? Where's my return? I've experienced that, and rightfully so. Those are the questions they should be asking. So you just get to ask that question, or your wife has to ask you that question.
Yeah. This whole thing has been a learning curve. There are definitely things, looking back, we would do a little differently. I think, one thing we didn't factor in was maybe having I think when you're producing a movie, you think, well, the distributor's going to pick it up. They're going to do lots of marketing. And that didn't happen.
Nope.
So the
You got to
marketing
go raise
end
your
of
own P&A.
yeah. And so that's been a challenge on the back end of it, that we've learned and, probably wish we would have anticipated a little sooner on that. But
All right, ding, ding, ding. I always like to point out great moments in a conversation where a lesson can be learned. And this is a lesson that's not unique to you at all. Just to reiterate for those filmmakers out there, I said earlier that funding is the most difficult part. And that's actually, I think it's the second most difficult part. The first most difficult part is once you have a good film, is actually getting it distributed with the kind of marketing you need to earn that return on investment. So if your budget doesn't include marketing in the budget, it doesn't include your own P&A so that you can control it, it's going to make it a long uphill battle because like you said, distributors, they want to distribute, they want to manage the process, but gone are the days where they'll actually put up their own. I mean, used to like 10, 15, 20 years ago, you'd get a distribution deal that includes P&A. P&A, if you don't know, is prints and advertisements, is the old, not for you, I know you know this, but for listeners, it's the old term that basically means marketing, the cost of actually getting it into theaters and marketing it to get into theaters. So distributors used to oftentimes offer you P&A, and they'd even offer you what's called MG, a minimum guarantee, where they'd go to the filmmaker and say, here's X number of dollars. This is for you. Hopefully it covers your production budget. And then we're going to put in X number of dollars for marketing. And then you as the filmmaker you're sitting in a place where you're at least breaking even. But gone are those days, and now you've got to raise your own P&A and figure out how to market it so you can return some of that money. And it's not all about money, but you also, as a filmmaker, you don't want to dig yourself into such a hole that you can't make another movie.
Yeah. And, you've summarized kind of what we've learned. Shannon and I went into this saying, because there was one point as I was going through this journey, I actually had a chat with another film producer, and he came across anyway as quite bitter about, things he had been promised by distributors and it hadn't come through. So we were just kind of like, okay, Lord, this is for you. If the money doesn't come through, we just know that you were leading us this way. And at this point, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. We're still doing everything we can to market the movie, to get the word out. We're doing some showings in some churches, promoting on social media, doing everything we can because most of the people who have seen it have responded very positively. It's just, kind of getting it there and letting them realize that it's there.
Yep, that's the journey we all go on. I want to bring you back for another episode because I've so many more questions, but I do think that the last thing you said just kind of sparked an advertisement for the Faith and Family Filmmakers Network. One of the best ways to learn about these things, other than, diving in and doing them and learning from your wins and your mistakes, is to network, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hope everybody listening is a member of the Faith and Family Filmmakers Network. And go to the table reads if you can, go to the network and events if you can. It all helps you in your journey to make the right decisions. But James, I appreciate you being on this episode. Let's come back for another episode and want to learn more about the process of making the film.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast. If you've been enjoying this podcast, take a moment to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so you don't miss an episode. And if you'd like to support the production of this podcast, you can leave a tip at faffpodcast.com/support. Bringing filmmakers together for faith and family.